Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And we're really delighted to have our good friend Alafair Burke back with us, albeit virtually, to discuss her killer new book, Find Me. And Barbara and I are going to be doing kind of a tag team effort tonight. Alafair was going to be coming here in person, but at the last minute, we had to make some changes. We all have had to make some changes recently. But she is going to be signing a batch of books for us. So if you ordered a signed copy, or if you'd like to, they'll be a little bit late, but not too bad. Another week or so, we'll have them in stock. But here's the beautiful new book. Welcome, Alafair. It's always great to see you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. It's really our pleasure. Now, I see that in the bio in the book, it said you're the author of 14 novels. Is this the 15th?
This is the 14th if you don't count the 6 novels I co-authored with Mary Higgins Clark. So I never know how you count the co-authored ones. So I have 6 with Mary, and I think this is my 14th on my own.
Got it. So 20 altogether, which is really an impressive total. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Since 2003. So
it was really,
of course, we all miss Mary. Yeah.
She was a wonderful person. So in writing 6 novels with Mary, what'd you learn?
That Mary Higgins Clark is a wonderful person and an extremely talented and knowledgeable author. No, I still have to kind of pinch myself of like, oh yeah, I wrote 6 novels with Mary Higgins Clark, because I mean, I read her books when I was in middle school, I guess. Where are the children? That and V.C. Andrews, were like the playground paperbacks, these like spine-tingling books. So, who would have ever, young me would not have ever predicted that I would be going to writing meetings to go figure out the new plot and all the new characters of Mary. So it's hard that she's gone. And I finished, she and I were almost done with the last book when she passed away. We were exchanging pages even I think 3 days before she passed away, like the end of January of 2020. So finishing it alone, like after COVID had started, was just this kind of, I don't know if I would have been able to do any other work other than that work, but like I felt an obligation, like I've got to see this through, it's like, I'm going to get this done. I'm going to carry it across the finish line for us and for her. But, luckily we had, thought it all out. It was more just executing our plans. But, her son told me, Mom always had an excellent sense of timing. And it's almost like a little angel pulled her away and was like, hey, it wouldn't be the worst thing if you missed the next couple of years, because her, big celebration of her life was at the end of January of 2020. And much later than that, you wouldn't have been able to do it. The idea of not celebrating her in that big way in New York would have been pretty unimaginable. So
where was the celebration?
She lives in New Jersey, so it was her, the church that she had attended for decades with her family, and yeah.
Wow.
So I know she was part of that roundtable group in New York for many years.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That whole crowd was there, of course. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people were there. So.
She was really fabulous.
We
had some very nice photos of her at the store and all. I always remember her jewelry was just amazing. And she would always,
I have my, I've learned to put your laptop up higher so that you're not seeing the ceiling and everything. But I will say, so I've got all these books sitting on my table to prop up all of the Zoom stuff. But so she told, like, every year when she would get her author picture done, she would treat herself to a new piece of jewelry for each book. So
I once did a crossing from New York to London on the Queen Elizabeth, the old Queen Elizabeth. And my sister, who was the assistant director at the Museum of Modern Art, was the speaker. And I was going to London. I can't remember what to do. But anyway, we're on the ship, and Mary and her family were there, and she was another speaker. And every day she would walk around the ship, and every day she had some other fabulous, couture and jewelry and the whole bit. She was always so immaculate. But Alafair, the first time she came to see us, we were in our little tiny bookstore over on Main Street, the one we referred to as being at the horse's ass because there was this equestrian statue and we were literally at the horse's ass. So she had friends and she was going to have dinner with them and she thought she was coming in, to do, it was too small for a talk. So she was going to sit down and talk to people and she figured she'd be there about an hour and all the rest of it. And we didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. So at one point there were over 600 people going down and around the block. We had to send somebody to Costco with a credit card to buy more books because we were clearly running out. It went on till something like 10 o'clock at night. And I remember her kind of, saying to her friends that she was sorry that they'd be disappointed about dinner, but her fans came first. And she sat there in that.
That's amazing.
She really did.
That's
it
truly
was like
amazing.
5 hours at least. And she, she never missed a beat.
Oh my
She was
God.
totally gracious. We were all flabbergasted. And also it's the first time we learned that we could buy books at Costco.
Basically the same. That's funny. So I have a similar story. So out of East Hampton on the east end of Long Island, they do this big library festival every summer called Stars for the Night or Author Stars Night. But in any event, it's a big tented event in the height of, it's hot, it's August, it's very warm. There's no air conditioning, obviously, it's outdoors. But the publisher will donate, maybe 40 books, 50 books to the library, and then they sell it and you sit there under the tent and you sign your books. And, some people, like, their books don't get sold and Mary's books were gone like that. And my husband, it's super hot. Like I'm like sneaking off to the air conditioned bathroom like every 15 minutes just to go like this. And she sat there at that table and I looked over and I could see her books were gone. And my husband Sean went to go check on her and said, look, your books are gone. Like, let me take you back to the house and you can just wait, until dinner, because there's also an author's dinner. And she's like, no, but readers are still here. And like, she just sat there, even though the books were gone, in the heat, the sweltering heat, and like took selfies and talked to people. And her commitment to her readers was unparalleled. So yeah,
I agree.
that's consistent with what you're talking about. She scolded me once we were signing books together and she had a very perfect signature, and you've seen my signature. It's a lawyer's signature. Like you signed your name too many times in the bureaucracy. And she was like, these people waited in line for your signature. They should be able to read it. And I was like, oh, I feel really bad now. I can't, I'm like 50 years old. I can't reduce my signature, but yeah, she was very committed to her readers.
She was a wonderful person. I'm glad we kept her as long as we did. I think she was just 90 when she died, or coming right up on it?
She was,
I think she
92.
Was 92?
92, I believe. Yeah. She was definitely in her 90s. Yeah.
Right. I remember she made a funny line. Somebody asked her, I think when she was just turned 90, whether she was working on a new book. And her response was that the gap between 89 and 90 was much larger than she had anticipated. She was, slower. Anyway, let's talk about Find Me. What a good idea.
Yes.
So here it is, your 14th book. And is this the 5th one with Ellie Hatcher?
Well, I think it's a standalone, but Ellie has 5 books that are real Ellie books, but Ellie appears in this. And so this is the 6th book that she has appeared in.
Well, but part of her story, which we can't discuss, unfortunately,
right?
But part of Ellie's story is satisfied in this book. Of Ellie's life that's been there for a while. So you're right; it's not really her book, but on the other hand, I think you have to include it in the Hatcher universe.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
Right.
I don't think you have.
Patrick, I know that you've read the book also. What got you interested in this whole memory issue? Because a lot of this book hinges on the fact that there's a missing memory.
Yes, and so I'll answer the first part of the question first, but then I will explain why it is not goofy, even though there's a person with amnesia in it. So I have always been fascinated by memory. My senior college thesis, even as an undergraduate, involved looking at the effects of emotion on memory and looking at the unreliability of eyewitness identification and all of that body of empirical data about memory. So that's always just been something like that I track as a intellectual interest, I guess. But of course, as a trope or a device or a recurring story in fiction, of course, there's a reason why people find that interesting. And part of me, almost like when I do the little 1-sentence summary of my book, I'm like, a woman with amnesia goes missing. I'm kind of like, but it's not what you think. So Hope Miller, who, even though she's missing in my mind, she's the main character of the book. She's not a current amnesiac to some extent. She, for the last 15 years, she has lived her life as Hope Miller in a small town and has made her way in the world. And she has a job and a place to live, and she has friends and associations. But her backstory is that 15 years ago, she was found thrown from an overturned SUV in this small town in New Jersey with massive injuries that she wasn't necessarily going to survive. She had no identification and no money. And she made it past her physical injuries, but she never regained her memory. She doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know where she came from. And she doesn't know why she was in a car that actually turned out to be stolen. But at some point, she decides to kind of shut the door on the past and accept that she may never find out who she was. And she makes a life for herself. But then at some point, being the girl in the small town where everybody sort of feels sorry for you, everyone knows you're that girl who doesn't actually know who she is. She's like, I don't want to do this forever. Like, I'm actually now happy as Hope Miller, but I don't want people to know that my backstory is complicated. It no longer matters to me. So she moves away from that small town. She moves to East Hampton, this nice beachy place that lots of people migrate to. And she's like, I can be anonymous here. Nobody's going to know that I'm complicated. I can just be Hope. And then when she moves there, she disappears. And then her best friend, Lindsay, goes looking for her. So to me, the amnesia is it's part of her backstory, but literally, right, she doesn't know her prior identity. But I think to some extent, it's almost a metaphor for, lots of crime fiction deals with, can you leave the past in the past, right? Or does the past catch up with you in the future? Hope's kind of had no choice but to leave the past in the past because she doesn't have access to it. And then the question is, did it find her anyway? So that's my sort of not quick summary of the book, but that's why. So I find memory stuff interesting at an intellectual level, but for me, it was an interesting way to explore this whole idea of, does the past really matter, by making it an involuntary choice that she doesn't have access to her past.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, was there a particular story, that kind of inspired, where did the original idea come from? I'm sure
it's
there
a
may be
couple
probably
of
several different sources, probably.
It's a couple of things put together. So there was a quite well-known case of a man, actually, he turned up like with injuries that still to this day, they don't know where he got the injuries. But he disappeared without any explanation in a town that doesn't seem like he's from there, with no explanation as to how he got there, claiming not to know who he was. And he lived like that for almost a decade before they eventually figured out who he was. And he had to live under an assumed name. And just like Hope, it is actually the case that you can change your identity. Like if I decided to change my name to, Beyonce, I could, but I would have to say who I used to be so that there is, a chain so you can find out who people are. You can't create an identity from whole cloth. So he had to live in limbo without any kind of legal existence. And I thought that was interesting. And then a separate case was several years ago in New York. A woman was found in the Hudson River, all like near drowning, basically. And when they pulled her from the water, she claimed not to know who she was. And it turns out she had been missing and reported missing, and she was in a fugue state where she was unable to account for these weeks that she was missing. But when they put it together after the fact, there was security footage of her like going to her gym to take a shower. Like, so she was doing these kind of routinized things, but she had lost all memory of it. And I was really fascinated by this idea of you have no idea of like big chunks of time that you can't account for. At the same time, you know, I was a prosecutor. I was also a little skeptical. I was kind of like, really? You don't remember going to your gym and taking a shower? And all the experts have actually said her case was very legitimate. But at the time, I was kind of like, that sounds made up to me. And so I think all of that kind of went into Hope's story of, even if after 15 years, people came to trust her and to think like that's an awful long time to be playing the long game of pretending to have amnesia for 15 years. When she goes missing, of course, some people become skeptical of the entire account, which makes it harder to find her.
Right. So, you know, one of the things, it seems to me that this is really, on some level, a book about three women, you know, these three women and how they interact, and you know, the friendship, you know, I mean, obviously Lindsay going to look for her friend has a different, she's willing to believe different things than, you know, and then Ellie comes into the picture. Again, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but they have very different approaches, very different attitudes toward this person. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that. To me, the real heart of the book, the thing that makes the book really work, is the friendship between Lindsay, Kelly, and Hope. That Lindsay's the one going and looking for Hope, and they're this bond that they have. I mean, to some extent, it's like many female friendships that are complicated and entangled and arguably codependent, and you know, the men in their lives are sort of jealous of it and don't get it. And it's a typical close female friendship in that respect. But the origin of their friendship is that Lindsay is the one who found Hope when she was thrown from that overturned stolen SUV, and kind of literally saves her life. And you know, as you read the book, you kind of come to see how that shapes their relationship, that Lindsay kind of is very aware of the fact that I literally saved you, and Hope is very aware of the fact that I'm literally dependent upon you. You know, you're the one who legally owns my car. Like, is this really, it's not necessarily a friendship with an even power structure. And they are dependent on each other. Like Lindsay for the emotional satisfaction of, you need me, you'll never leave me, I saved you. And Hope literally depends on Lindsay for a lot of her support. So at the same time, there's something very genuine about this friendship. And it's very clear that Lindsay will stop at nothing to find Hope, so that even when other people are sort of skeptical about maybe Hope left on her own, or maybe Hope was sketchy all along, Lindsay's going to refuse to believe that. So, I mean, she's just so committed to finding her. My dog.
Oh,
double.
yeah.
He's like, hi, mama, you're talking. So it's too funny. I'm sorry. And then I think what, you know, we've talked a little bit and can't give too much away about Ellie Hatcher's role in this story, but Ellie's not motivated by friendship. She's motivated by obsession, that she has her own reasons to want to find out what's going on with Hope. And it's not because she cares about Hope personally. She cares about her own connection to kind of a tangential piece of Hope's missing persons case. But I think what ties the two pieces of the story together is that this idea that, to the extent Ellie Hatcher's obsessed, Lindsay's a little obsessed too. And I kind of want the reader to question whether this fine line between genuine unconditional love and support, and at what point does that become sort of a selfish obsession. And So the more Lindsay looks for hope, I think the reader learns more about Lindsay as well. One of the challenges of writing this book is that, to me, the main character is Hope, but Hope's actually missing. So
Yeah.
if you do read Find Me, enjoy that prologue, because you're not going to see Hope for like the main character is missing. So the reader learns a lot about Hope kind of in the opening pages, but for the most part, they're learning about her through the eyes of other people. And I think that was kind of it was a challenge writing the book, but hopefully I've done it successfully, because I think you learn a lot about her through other people's eyes, but you learn not just about her, you're learning about the narrators as they talk about her, right? Everybody kind of has their own take on who she is and what their connection to her is.
Right.
And one of the things I find really fascinating is how much technology is impacting crime fiction, what you can do with it. Plots that have disappeared, like the missing air plot, which is blown up by DNA and so forth. And I was thinking in regard to Hope, you have to assume, assuming that people would do this kind of testing, but you think they would, she's got to be a person without fingerprints or whatever on file, because, that would be a relatively easy thing to do. Then, they're, this whole ancestry.com thing, where people put in their DNA and find relatives, that's another potential path for identifying somebody like her, would be to, upload her DNA and see if you can come across any sort of family. And I was trying to think, do you like this kind of thing too? Your story could be derailed by application.
See, Barbara's too smart. She's forcing me to show how the sausage is made. So, I had to pick the year that she turned up very carefully.
Right. And
because if it's too recent, correct. There's too many avenues available to find her, right? 15 years ago, depending on, I never exactly say when the book is set, but it puts you kind of in the mid-aughts, right? 2005-ish, 2006-ish. There was an internet, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is now. Like, there wasn't really something going viral so much, right? And it wasn't common for people to be doing 23andMe and things like that. And then the other, of course, if she kept at it, times would catch up to her, right? But part of the premise of the book is think of it this way, there's lots of books where the backstory of a character is their child or their spouse went missing 15 years ago and they were never found, right? Yes, there are some people that it will continue to consume them every single day for 15 years, and will wake up and the only thing they do is look for that person, right? But if the person is you, what's missing is your own past. I think it's hard to put yourself in those very peculiar shoes, but I think at some point you stop, right? That she's, maybe I don't, plus there's this idea of maybe I don't want to know. Like, she knows that she's very young when this happens. They don't know her exact age, but she looks like she's either like, very late teens or early 20s. She's a fairly young person. She knows that she was without ID, without money, in a stolen car, and that no one is apparently looking for her. Right? If someone was looking for her, she would get found. So she's just looking for someone who might be looking for her, and no one's looking for her. So at some point, Hope realizes, maybe I just take the bird in hand that these nice people in this small town are taking care of me. I have a job. I have somebody who lets me live in their garage apartment. I have a friend. I have safety and security here. And maybe I did something bad. Maybe somebody was trying to hurt me, and that's why I was running away. So to some extent, she stopped looking. And so part of the issue for Lindsay is, as she's looking for Hope and will stop at nothing to find her, to some extent, she's almost betraying Hope by trying to find out where Hope came from, because at some point Hope sort of said, you know what, let's just let it lie.
Well, I think there is a real danger in a position like Hope's, that you might find out something you'd rather not have known. It could be that
Right.
amnesia is the blessing. And before I have to trot off to feed the dogs, the one thing I was thinking about doesn't apply
dogs.
to your story, but the one coming along to completely derail this idea of a successful amnesia or missing person is facial recognition techniques, because once that I couldn't believe it when the last trip I flew abroad, flying out of LAX to Frankfurt, you didn't have a plane ticket. Your boarding pass and everything was the facial recognition software or machinery at the gate, of Lufthansa's gate. That was it. And and I thought to myself, wow, that is, because I'm always thinking about crime fiction plots. I thought to myself, that is going to, put a real crimp in a lot of this kind of idea of amnesia or missing persons, or you can't figure out who anybody is or whatever. And so,
so 20 years from now, I can't write this book 20 years from now.
Well, that's my point.
Again, that stuff didn't exist, but when she disappeared, that stuff didn't exist. So she's kind of
right. Well, I
like
mystery plots.
That 15 years, a lot happened in 15 years.
Yeah. I hate to see some of the really great crime fiction tropes and devices fall by the wayside as technology comes along. I just think it's interesting. So I'm glad you wrote a book that was credible, that you could do it in that time frame.
You know me. Any question that you come, grill me all you want. I've got it. It's all worked out, but it does take a lot to work out. But who knows? 20 years from now, it could be that you write the story because she was frozen. They froze her for 20 years or something.
It's really true. I've been thinking
we live in weird times.
I've been thinking about the age gap between me and a number of writers. I've been reading some books by writers in their 30s and 40s, and the internet and social media is such an integral part. And to me, it's like irrelevant. And I'm recognizing that I'm aging out of the more modern crime fiction novel because, I don't really care what my life might look like on Twitter or Instagram or something. But clearly for some of the people in these books by younger authors, it's their whole world. And it's hard for me to even step into it.
Yeah, I'm with you. My sister Andre for Christmas gave me, I had to stop and decide what VR stands for, virtual reality goggles. Yeah. And I was like, I have no idea what to do with these. But it was such a generous gift. It was such a generous gift. I'm like, I gotta sit down and figure out what to do with these. So Sean and I were watching videos on them and trying to do exercises and things, and I was so freaked out by it. So I was talking recently with friends, and I'm like, I don't really get it. I'm like, it's really fun, like just like to watch a movie or like watch a video. We were watching like surfing videos and stuff on it, like it was like this vertigo experience. But I'm like, I don't really understand what it's for. And they were telling me that this whole idea, like the super like futuristic dystopian idea, is that the next time COVID happens, you don't have to leave your house. You just live online, and you're not interacting as yourself. Like you and I would, Barbara and Patrick and I, you would be an avatar. And so like, you could sit in your pajamas, but you buy your avatar like designer clothes. And I'm like, don't get me started. I was freaking out. I was like, we have to stop talking about it, because throw me in the ocean right now. I don't want to live like that. I don't like it.
I love it. Well, Peloton sort of previewed this, I think, with their exercise.
The Meta, isn't it called Meta now?
Something like that.
Is that Meta?
It's great to see
the new Facebook. Yeah. Nice to talk to you, Barbara.
You too. I'm going to leave you with Patrick, and since he's a lot younger than him, you can pursue these questions in a different way.
You're like, I'm not going to be Barbara Peters' avatar. Nope.
I love it.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for staying on with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Brave New World. That's actually sounds horrifying.
Yeah, and I have no interest in writing about it. Like, the more, Barbara's point is like the crime fiction she knows like hardly anyone else knows, right? And loves. She's like, oh my God, it's going to have to change because all this stuff is going to make the usual things I like to read in the story obsolete, but the stuff that it gets replaced with, like, my books use technology to some extent, but it's, it's kind of regular stuff. You like trace an IP address, or someone catfishes
Right.
somebody, or you get a clue by somebody who posted something on Instagram, so you know where they were that day. But when you get into that level, like, to me, it starts to sound like science fiction. I'm like, I can't.
Right.
I like science fiction. I have no interest in writing it, however.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about just kind of the basic setup at the very beginning of the book. So it's not too much of a spoiler, and Hope is relocated, as you say, to this Grey Gardens kind of area. I like to joke about. She's working for this kind of skeezy realtor. Can you talk a little bit about that basic setup?
Yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned before, it really is the case. And some people are like, oh, she would have had a social security number by now after 15 years. It really is the case that you can't just create a new identity. And the reason for it is that the risks of fraud and shenanigans are so obviously high if you just let people who are adults just create some whole new identity without disclosing who they are. And then the number of people who need it legitimately so low, right, that there's no governmental incentive to make that process exist, right? So she has to live completely without a social security number or a driver's license or anything lawful like that. And there's a character in the book that I won't explain the person's relevance, but they don't have legal status as a citizen. And there are plenty of people in this country who do live like Hope lives, right? It's kind of in the shadows, in legal limbo. They don't technically exist. So that's how she lives. So, there are plenty of people in this country who they work under the table, right? They get paid cash, and sometimes it's because they're a nanny or a babysitter or day labor, but she finds kind of sketchy realtor out there, and is working for him, setting up open houses and kind of being his assistant essentially, and that's Hope finds that job and is kind of proud that she found it herself. But Lindsay, who's a lawyer, who also frankly doesn't want Hope to move away, right? She wants Hope as close to her as possible. She doesn't really want Hope to be independent. She's skeptical of this guy from the start. So when Hope disappears, she kind of focuses on him to begin with.
Right. I was just, was there any of the three main characters, was there one that kind of surprised you during the course of the writing and you found yourself, I don't know, liking more than the others?
Liking, yeah. Well, I love Ellie Hatcher. She's my girl, and so it was fun to be able to get back to her, even though she's kind of almost the secondary character in this book. And she doesn't surprise me. That the things that, to the extent Ellie Hatcher's story is relevant to this book, I've always known that, like from the beginning. So
really?
I knew that from the very first book. I knew all of that. I knew Ellie's backstory. It was just a question of how it was going to come out. Hope and Lindsay, when I started this book, Patrick, before I wrote The Wife and The Better Sister.
Oh really? Okay.
And Ellie was always going to be in it. A woman from a small town was going to go missing, and there was going to be a connection between her disappearance and this other story. But the narrator that I had really wasn't quite like Hope. She was a little different. And then the person looking for her was actually more of a professional investigator, somebody who was kind of assigned to be her victim's advocate when she first got into her car accident. And I just kind of wasn't feeling the connection between the two of them. So I kind of kept putting it, I'm like, I'm not sure this is ready. And meanwhile, I've got this great other idea for a standalone. And so I wrote The Wife, and then I wrote The Better Sister. And then I kept continuing to think about this book. And so it changed a lot while I was writing those other two novels. But what really made it work is in the previous iteration, Lindsay was kind of just the friend. She wasn't the person who was gonna lead the charge on finding her. And when I kind of just kept thinking about that relationship and what it would look like and its origins, and how if they met when they were only 22, 20 years old, like they basically kind of become adults together. And when I really entangled them, that's when I kind of found, for me, what the heart of the book is this book to a large degree is really about friendship.
Right. It's funny
And
because
commitment.
it's almost like Hope is in a sort of witness protection program, although you wouldn't really call it that, Did you have to do any research for some of those details, about her legal identity and about how that would work?
I did it. I try very hard to avoid having to do research. If I don't know something, I'm like, instead of being a beekeeper, why don't I have them be a writer? I know something about that, so if you become my friend, it's quite possible I've had people who are booksellers and books, like anything I kind of know about, I'm like, I can just have them do that instead. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that I had the details on that right. And research surprises you, because initially I was doing it not because I thought it was a super important part of the story. I just wanted to make sure it was correct, right? Factually correct, that she wouldn't just be able to establish an identity. But the more I looked into it, kind of requires you to think more deeply about that. And so it kind of led to just, kind of like these little small things. So like at some point, Lindsay was pretty smart, is kind of trying to figure out like, okay, how do you find somebody, right? So if you or I went missing and somebody was looking for us, the typical things you would do is, you look to see if they used your credit cards.
Yep.
She doesn't have credit cards, right? Just it not only complicates her past that she doesn't have these things, it complicates the search for her. And so one of my favorite just little small things is at some point, somebody suggests to Lindsay, because the police aren't really taking Hope's disappearance all that seriously, there's no signs of foul play, she was new to town, she was someone who suddenly appeared out of nowhere before. So in their eyes, it's like, this sounds like somebody who just kind of comes and goes and is a little bit transient. And she came here and didn't like it. Lindsay. And she bailed. Yeah, exactly. And you can't put her in a database because she doesn't have a driver's license, right? What name and driver's license number do you put in the database? So you can't even put her in a missing persons database. So at some point, Lindsay thinks, well, I could report the car stolen because the car is registered under Lindsay's name. But then if the police do find her, they're looking at her as a suspect, right, not as somebody who needs help. And then she won't have a driver's license. Her explanation for not having a driver's license could lead to really bad things. And so it complicates the search for her as well.
And the entanglement, as you say, now that I think about it, that is, it exists on so many levels because of her friendship with Lindsay, for whatever reason, the authorities kind of look the other way a little bit, at her driving around and not having this legal there. She's allowed to kind of grow and thrive this way in this small little community, which is very parochial in a lot of ways,
And again, I think, I think this book makes a really good book club book because there's a lot to talk about because you asked me which characters do you like. I can see a lot of people taking Lindsay and Hope's friendship at face value and being like, no, these two women just really adore each other and are committed to each other and it's an unconditional friendship. But the other take on it, however, is that Lindsay's kind of got this controlling idea about her that she can never leave me. I not only saved her life, but she's dependent on me and I don't have to worry that she's going to abandon me, right? And so when Hope leaves town, I can see people potentially, one reading of that is Lindsay almost wants to find her and bring her home
Put her back in the cage.
Shelter her back, to put her back into the crate. Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but-
Now, I know we don't want to give a spoiler, but can we bring Ellie into the equation without a spoiler? Can you discuss
Yes.
why she's connected?
Yes. So the thing that I think is not too big of a spoiler is we talked about the sketchy realtor. When Lindsay goes looking for Hope, she finds out that Hope was staging a open house for this realtor. She talks her way into that house with the woman who owns it. She finds what she thinks looks like a blood stain, and then she kind of manipulates this dubious police officer. She's kind of like, hey, if you want to get rid of me, tell me what that is on the carpet. Like, bring in some luminol. If it's not blood, I'll get out of here. But it turns out to be blood. And then once it's blood, she's like, well, you can't ignore that. And manipulates him into putting it into the National Cold Case DNA database. And it hits to a serial killing case from 30 years earlier. Hope's only like 35 years old, so something's not adding up. But it hits to a blood sample taken from one of the cases in a serial killing case in Wichita, Kansas 30 years ago. And that's the case that Ellie Hatcher is obsessed with,
Right.
because that was her father was the chief investigator on that case. And he died before that person was ever caught. He supposedly committed suicide, and Ellie has never been convinced that that's correct. So that's kind of Ellie's obsession, is the minute she hears that there's been a hit to that College Hill Strangler case, as he called himself, she is immediately like a dog without a bone. And she's like, I kind of don't care about Hope or Lindsay or any of this stuff. I care about that blood stain.
Right.
And I need to figure out what that is. And so I love books where, you know, that dramatic irony of the reader knows more than any one character. So that the reader gets to see all of the things Lindsay knows about Hope, all of her thoughts, all of the information she's gathering, but you also have, through Ellie's eyes, you know, everything she knows about that story.
A no bullshit kind of approach.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't have,
and a professional's approach.
Right.
Now, I wanted to ask you, you know, poor godforsaken Wichita. I know you gets a bad rap. Boy, your dad tells some funny stories about that place.
He's the one who moved there. Just want to say.
I always ask him to talk about his
I was a child.
What was it? The burial plot salesman story. You know that one he tells about the burial plot. You have to ask him.
I'm sure I do.
You probably blanked it out. But can you talk a little bit about, because the BTK case was going on, isn't that right, when you were living there, and that had a profound influence on you?
Yeah, I think so. You know, I was born in Southern Florida, and when I had just finished the 3rd grade, I think, my dad got a job teaching at Wichita State University. And so we were moving there, and, you know, they had to tell, I guess I was 8, maybe, they had to tell their 8-year-old. And all I knew, I still remember my brother was the one who actually, I was like, I literally didn't know what Kansas was. And he brings out the map and he's like, we live here, and this is where we're moving, you know, in the middle of the map. And I was like, where's the beach? Where's the water? Like, I know, I at least know what a map is. I know the blue part's the water. And he's like, there's no water. I'm like, we go to the beach all the time. Like, to this day, like, I still need to live near a beach. I'm like, there's no beach. So I was having none of it. I'm like, hey, I'm young, I'm cute as a button. Someone will adopt me. You guys go. I'm staying here. Like, I did not want to go. Plus, Andy Gibb lived in Florida. He did not live in Kansas.
Oh.
So I couldn't meet him and marry him if I moved to Kansas. I had very strong feelings about this. So the way they sold it to me was, hey, when we moved to Kansas, you don't have to share a bedroom with your sisters. You can have your own room. We're going to have a bigger house. You're going to have a better school with better programs. So kind of selling it to me as like the good American life. So we moved there. in my mind, at least, I don't even think we had unpacked. Like, I remember like still having cardboard boxes around, and my dad had the local news playing in the background. Still to this day, the news is always on in the background. And they announced that there's a serial killer killing women and children. I'm like, oh, and the children too. Did you hear that, Dad? The children too. I'm like, let's go back to that house in Florida by the beach. There's no serial killer there. But yeah, he called himself BTK, which stands for Bind, Torture, Kill. And, you know, some people might have turned off the TV around an 8-year-old when that kind of news came on, but my parents didn't. And, you know, they didn't catch him till, I was a law professor. They didn't catch him till 2003 or something like that.
Right, right.
2004. I was already an author by then. It was probably 2004 or 5. And, you know, so when I grew up there, the whole time I lived there, it was still, you know, an unsolved case. And the way we grew up is, you know, as soon as you came home, you would check obviously we still had landlines, you would check the phone to make sure there was a dialed phone, because he would cut the phone lines so that people couldn't call for help. There were bolts on all the basement doors in Wichita back then. I've actually been kind of curious. I should ask my sister who still lives there, Andre, if, like, I'm sure in the older homes, there's probably still bolts on all the basement doors, because the rumor was that he got in through the main house through the basement. That turned out not to be true. He just talked his way through the front door. But yeah, it was a weird way to grow up. Like, he was kind of the real life boogeyman there.
Yeah.
And I was always obsessed by it. Yeah. And I kind of found a way to write about it. It's a long story to have time. At one point, when he was first caught, I wrote a letter, not to him, to his lawyers, because, you know, his lawyers were about my age and they had grown up in Wichita too. So I was kind of wondering, like, wow, what's that like? Like, you're a defense attorney and now you're defending the guy that I assume you were terrified of as a child, right? So I kind of wanted to interview them, because I'm a law professor. I was thinking about writing something like for the, you know, some kind of magazine targeted at lawyers, like the ABA magazine or something, about the tests, kind of the limits of being a defense attorney, like when you have to defend your own boogeyman. But of course, you know, they're public defenders with their hands full, and they get a letter from some author explaining, like, I'm curious about your story or whatever. So they gave the letter to him, and he wrote me a letter,
really?
like saying, like, I'm so flattered. Yeah. And handwritten in that same weird scrawl that he used to write his like creepy BTK letters in to the police, saying that he was so flattered that I was interested in his story, and that my parents must be so proud of me for my accomplishments. And I was like, I want nothing of this. This is super creepy. So I didn't want to glorify him. I didn't want to have any contact with him. And I kind of forced myself. I think it was my dad, actually. Like, I told him how grossed out I was, and like, I never should have written the letter. It was a mistake. And he goes, you know, ask yourself why you are, like, he's like, he's not interesting. And I'm like, no, he's not interesting. He's actually kind of rote, you know, like, he's not a satisfying character on the page. Like, he's just kind of this gross guy. And I realized what made him interesting to me is the way I started the story, that when we moved to Wichita, it was supposed to be this safe, kind of sanitized, hey, this place is boring. It doesn't have, you know, it's not a big fancy city, and it doesn't even have a beach, but you're going to be safe here. And that he kind of found a way to take advantage of that and to do like these very evil things. And so I think what I just kind of decided what I can do is take somebody who grew up, you know, for me, it was universal. I was no more scared of him than probably any other kid in Wichita was, but to make it personal. So Allie Hatcher grew up in a house where his crime scene photos were like on the, you know, her father's office walls, like that she was being exposed to this in a way that, and her father didn't protect her from the details. And so it kind of explains to some degree her obsessions and her kind of comfort with darkness.
Right. I'm just trying to pay attention to is that, I don't mean to, the thumb keeps coming up. Is that me that's inadvertently doing that? The thumbs up?
No. Oh my God. So it's me.
Pulse
So
of
it's
thumb.
I'm trying to put it down. Okay. So, you used to be able, you'd raise your hand, or you could, now it's got, you can put a thumb. So I talk with my hands a lot. And so it keeps happening when I do Zooms that it thinks that I'm holding up my hand, or that I'm going,
Oh, really?
I'm not. Well, yeah, because I talk with my hands, and then it does it. So
Yeah.
I'll sit on my hands during my Zooms.
Right. Well, before I go to some of these questions that are coming in, I just wanted to ask you, how do you juggle all this stuff? I mean, I took a look at what you're doing, and I'm like, my God, she's a busy woman. Are you still teaching? I assume you are.
I do. I only teach in the fall.
Okay.
Hofstra's been very good about that, and that makes a big difference. I mean, the fall semester is only, 14 weeks or something. So,
And you're the president of the
I'm
MWA
glad
right now.
I am. I was very honored to be elected to do that. And then I write books. It's not that bad. I used to be a lawyer, so I was used to juggling a lot. And I'll be honest, I don't have kids. It sounds like a joke, like the dump up line, but it's not. I mean, I see my friends, and maybe I shouldn't say who they are.
Okay.
I'll be working for 4 hours, and then having a long lunch with my friends, and then doing the crossword puzzle. And they'll be like, oh, good for you. I spent the entire day driving my kid to a soccer meet 3 hours away for the semifinals. So, when all of your time is your own, you can be pretty productive.
But you're a dog lover and an animal lover.
I do. My obligation is these little guys.
Yeah.
Let's see if we
It's
can.
funny. Yeah, can we see?
You. Hey, Double. Can you see him? He's licking the kitchen floor for some reason. And then I think Franny might be with my husband watching TV in the other room. She tends to stay glued. She stays glued to my husband. This one stays glued to me, or the refrigerator. We call the refrigerator his refrigerator mama, because he sits, like when he first came to live here, he might have gotten taken away from his mom too young or something, but he immediately went and sat in front of our very warm refrigerator that kind of makes a humming sound. And 10 years later, it's like, hi, refrigerator. It's either me or the fridge.
It's funny. I was looking that we have so many parallels. No kids, lots of animals, probably more animals than you. But I'm also an October 1969 baby. Are you? What? I shouldn't have revealed
16.
that, but
that's all right. 16? I'm 16.
So you're Libra as well, right?
Yeah. Do you know Eric Beatner?
Yeah.
He's also October 1969.
Really?
I can't remember the exact date, but I feel like it's right in there.
Very interesting. I'm October 2nd.
Okay.
Let's see here. All right.
2 weeks.
Okay. What do we have? Oh yeah. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what you specialize in your, as a law professor? What are your areas of particular interest?
Yeah, I teach criminal law and criminal procedure. I was a prosecutor for 5 years and then I was at a law firm for about 2 years defending a RICO case and doing some other things. But so I teach criminal law and criminal procedure. When I write my legal academic work is about kind of prosecutorial decision-making, discretionary decisions, and law enforcement by both prosecutors and police. So I write about a lot of that kind of stuff and wrongful convictions, kind of that domain, kind of when things go wrong.
Anything with the Innocence Project or?
I write more on that. I don't handle cases through them, but I mean, they'll cite my work and other people's work too, in terms of explaining the sources of wrongful convictions. Yeah.
Right. And you were, if I remember correctly, you were living in Portland.
Yes,
for a while.
That's where I was a prosecutor. Yeah.
And then when did your first book come out?
So I left Portland in 1999. I moved to New York, but I moved to Buffalo, New York. That's where I was at a law firm for 2 years. And let's just say I had a lot of extra time on my hands. I thought if I'm ever going to write a book that had kind of been in my head, set in the DA's office in Portland, I'm like, if I'm ever going to do it, I should start it now. So I kind of wrote my first book for the most part there. And then I moved to the city, and I think I sold it in 2002 and it came out in 2003.
Right. Wow. Where does the time go, Alafair? My gosh.
I don't even. It's depressing to think about it. I think about how long, like, think about how long it feels like from third grade to when you get out of high school.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
I know, it
that's
feels like forever.
a really long time. And then think about the last 10 years and it doesn't feel that long at
I know.
all, so.
I know. Well, Tony there are a couple of people who are Samantha Kincaid fans, and yeah, any plans to revisit her at some point, or
going way back? There aren't right now, and I'll be honest, I love those books, but there's not really a demand for them. Maybe Tony can start a petition online that some publisher will let me write a Samantha Kincaid novel. You know, I think that she was sort of the victim to some extent of, you know, genre trends, and I think because those books were marketed as legal thrillers, and then legal thrillers, kind of the market was seen as flooded or old-fashioned or something. You know, the demand wasn't there, but she's in a short story I wrote called The Mother, that's in an MWA anthology that Lee Child edited, called Vengeance. And Samantha, she's not the main character, she kind of shows up, but in my head I know where Samantha is, but I don't know if I'm going to have the opportunity to find a way to tell other people where she is. Maybe at some point I'll just do a novella or something.
Right. Now with the Mary Higgins Clark books, are there plans to continue going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't obviously, like, you know, everybody just needed to grieve, and you know, there weren't immediate conversations about that. But with time, you know, then the issue comes up because people ask. So she wanted the series to live on. So she's not around, but Lori Morin is still around, and I'm still around. So that series will continue. But before that happens, however, she and I had talked about a sequel to Where Are the Children? So that's actually what I'm working on right now. So, really? And I'm finally allowed to tell people that. Yeah, I know, it's very exciting. It's a big responsibility though, but sure. If I talk too much about the responsibility, I'm gonna start having a panic attack about it. That's not a book you want to mess up, you know. It's a beloved, iconic novel. But I think it's important to do because, you know, as much as she earned that name, Queen of Suspense, and was beloved, but I think people forget, like, if she only wrote that one novel, right? If she only wrote Where Are the Children, the themes in that book were so edgy at the time and were so ahead of contemporary trends. So there's an unreliable narrator. There's a sketchy husband who gaslights his wife, right? There's children in peril. And there's some really dark themes in that book that aren't what her later work was probably known for, but, you know, her imprint is, you know, just undeniable on contemporary psychological thrillers. So I'm hoping that a sequel to that book will remind people that she was doing this long before the rest of us were.
When did that first book come out? Was that in the early 70s, or am I wrong? 70s?
The 40th anniversary of it was in 2007, something like that, maybe 70. Am I doing my math right? Mid 70s.
Mid 70s, yeah. Right. And, you know, so much of, you know, you were talking a few minutes ago about just moving to Wichita and this, you know, the illusion of the safe Walton's kind of environment.
Yeah.
And, you know, so much of what I think about Mary Higgins Clark and maybe a lot about psychological suspense in general is kind of like, you know, the horror behind the everyday prosaic details of life, that you think are
Right.
safe. Yeah. I always think about that way.
I mean, it's part of, In Cold Blood would be an amazing book, regardless of where it's set. But I do think that juxtaposition of, out there in the middle of nowhere, and that's when evil comes to find you. I think it makes it even scarier.
How did writing with her, collaborating with her, affect your own work as you went back to it?
One, I think that she made me work harder. I hate to say it because she was quite a bit older than I was, and we would meet for a writing meeting, and I would get a certain amount done and be like, okay, yeah, I think this is good for today. And she's like, we're still here, and she would just keep going. I was like, she could work me under the table. But I will say that the two of us together, I'm trying to think, I tend to take things, as long as I know like the next 3 scenes or something, and I know generally where I'm going, I kind of just wing it. Two people writing a book together can't wing it, right?
Right.
You kind of have to know what you're doing before you start dividing up the writing. So we kind of had just this 2-woman writing room where we would sit, her son would actually be with us and our editor. So it's kind of 2 of us with 2 other people. But we wouldn't start writing until we kind of knew everything. And then we would write a synopsis it was kind of like the Bible for the book, and we would just hew very closely to it. And I think doing that has kind of encouraged me to think things out more thoroughly than I might otherwise make myself do before. I'm like, I'll figure this out later. For now, I'll just write these 3 scenes, because it turns out, if you just find me, you've read it. There's a lot of story in there.
Yeah.
There's a lot happening. It's actually one of my shortest books, but it turns out if you actually know everything in advance, you don't spin your wheels wasting a lot of time just writing your 3 chapters for the day, right? Or your 3 scenes for the day. You kind of write with a purpose the entire time. So it's a little more efficient.
Did you have, episodes where you'd kind of write yourself into a corner and have to back out? Not with this book, but before, maybe, finding your way.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Or you just kind of, you stop, even though you still have energy to write, you might stop, like, well, it's enough for the day. I can't write more because I've got to figure this other thing out. And if you've already thought it out, that doesn't happen. But what you're saying is definitely true, because if you haven't thought everything out, you might winging it, and this might seem like a really good idea, and then you realize like, oh, wait a second, that's going to be a problem, and then you just wasted all this time writing to get there, and then you've got to redo a lot of stuff. What was really helpful, I say this as if I have figured it out. I haven't. I think it's really hard to think through an entire book without writing on your own. But when we did it together, and we were, I don't think it's bragging, it's more about her. I just think we were a very good fit, and she happened to pick somebody she probably knew what to look for. We were just a very good fit. If we were talking through a story where I might be like, oh, that might not make sense, and so I might just give it up, I might just drop it, she'd say, oh, no, it doesn't make sense because of that, but we could fix it by doing this, and get us back on track. And so it was almost like handing a baton to each other back and forth. And so instead of hitting a wall, we would kind of hit more like a speed bump, right? And then the other person would kind of think their way around it, and we'd keep going. So I really miss that. I'm not sure that I'll be able to replicate that with anybody else.
Do you kind of hear Mary sometimes when you're writing yourself?
Yeah.
Saying, okay,
well, because
here's what you have to do.
Particularly doing writing the sequel to Where Are the Children has very much been like, I keep a dog-eared copy of the paperback with me at all times, and I kind of go back in and reread it, and it's a nice reminder of her voice. And yeah.
Well, I know it's getting late. It's almost 10 o'clock where you are, I think. But
I was thinking about doing this in my pajamas. It would have given me a head start on going to bed.
Yeah. Before we wrap it up, I know that as well as being a prolific writer, you're a real enthusiast and fan of the genre, and read widely in it. And we're both fortunate enough to have a lot of friends, that are excellent writers. Can you just, for the people watching, just kind of give a shout out to some of the people that you think right now are really doing important, interesting, and fun, work?
It's always so much pressure because
I
I
know
I'm gonna leave
you don't want to
people
forget
out.
people, but I'll start by our mutual friend
I
Ivy
think
Pacoda. I think is a
I was going to say Ivy Pacoda. That was actually going to be the name that was right about to come. So in Ivy Pacoda's books, like she's really doing something special.
I agree.
She kind of writes about communities, right? And to say that sounds a little too abstract, but she writes about the people who are the product of their communities, and her settings are as unique and memorable as the characters that she creates who reside there. She's kind of creating she started out with being out in Brooklyn, but now she's kind of creating her own Ivy Pacoda LA. So, and then also in LA, Steph Cha, I think, is doing amazing work. And she's also she's the new editor of the Best American Mystery Stories and Suspense anthology.
Awesome.
That, and I was her first guest editor with that last year. So I'm going to plug that anthology because the people who like short fiction, I think it's a terrific collection. I think Sean Cosby is no shortage of praise for him. I think people recognize the work he's doing. There's books that are coming out. Alex Segura, do you know his books?
Yeah, I know who he is. I've never.
Yeah. He's got a book coming out called Secret Identity. I think it's like set though. It's a really interesting. So his kind of day job is he's a very successful person in graphic novel and comic book publishing. So it's a novel, it's a crime novel, but it's set in like the world of like 1970s comic book publishing, and it's really unique and fun. Yeah, it's a really good book. I think it's already gotten starred reviews from PW, and somebody, I just saw a second star review today, but his reviews are just starting to come in. They're so good.
Is Polis
so yeah, there's no, it's Zach is his editor, I think, who's at Flatiron, right?
Oh wow, great. Yeah. Great press.
Yeah, he's terrific. And lots of familiar names. Megan Abbott's book last year, The Turnout, was great. Laura Lippman, she's I don't know why I'm so much on short stories right now. She's got a short story collection out right now. Janelle Brown and Angie Kim. I could sit here and I can throw names at you all night long. Terrific writers. Yeah,
it's a great time right now. People are really sort of
it's unbelievable.
It's a renaissance period for fiction in general, not just crime fiction.
Yeah, and I think look, I love what you think of as a quintessential, like a locked room mystery or a police procedural, or kind of the things we have names for. But I think that there are writers right now using crime fiction to explore forms and themes that are kind of not typically what you find in the genre.
Yeah, it's super exciting. Well, Alafair, thanks so much. As always, good to spend an hour
with you. Thank you, Patrick. It's nice to talk to you. I wish I could be there in person, but thank you so much. Thanks for those of you who tuned in. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the book.
You bet. Thanks everybody for watching. And Alafair, can you stick around just for a second, Alafair? I just wanted to. Yeah,
definitely.
All right, everybody.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.